Hi, everyone. Welcome to the gathering. I am David Ault. And as always, I'm so honored and grateful that you are here with me. I have this writing deadline. And so, one of the things that I thought would be helpful for me would be to break out a bunch of old hard drives and see if there was anything in my catalog that I might be able to repurpose or re edit for this particular project. And I stumbled upon something that I had written, well over 10 years ago. And it started out where I was talking about how I read something from a disgruntled person, someone who was incredibly angry. And in their anger, they had mocked and condemned the spiritual philosophy that I subscribe to. They mocked and had great derision for anyone involved with it. I mean, they were so angry. And I didn't know the specifics of what their anger was about, but they had written this thing that was like a big takedown that just said everything about it, everything about metaphysics and the principles was all fraudulent, and they went on and on and on. And I was writing about how I felt when I read it. There was a little bit of, well, you're including me in this. And so I felt sad. I felt sad not understanding the circumstances as to why they wrote it. And I felt sad that because of those circumstances, they had just sort of thrown this blanketed thing of shame. The word that I used, or the term that I used, was shame blanket. They threw a shame blanket over this whole thing because of something that had upset them. And I felt all kinds of things towards this person. And then the strangest thing happened, and I was describing this in the piece. It made me think about my oldest brother. My oldest brother had been a professional baseball player. He had made millions of dollars and lost millions of dollars through a path of drug addiction, and eventually wound up in a position where he took his own life. Prior to all of that, there had been many, many years of turmoil and drama and circumstances that had scammed relatives. It was a terrible, terrible decline. And try as anyone might in order to find the appropriate help, it just had not worked. And so I had always been angry at my brother for that residue of suffering that had lingered across the family. And this other piece, this shame blanket reference that I just gave you, I realized I had done the same thing to my brother, because it had been really difficult to justify all of the outpouring of love for him when he died. As a sports figure, people would write and offer these stories about how amazing he had been in providing equipment for a multitude of little league ball clubs, how he had gone and visited children in the hospital with cancer, not to mention how he had delighted the fans. He was a huge personality. And I was having a hard time digesting all of that, because my particular view, my particular perception and relationship and experience with him was completely different, and had been since I was a child. It had always been volatile. It had always been scary. And I realized that I too had the ability to throw a shame blanket on something and to discount anything good that could have possibly come from his life. And so this term shame blanket as I was reading that, I thought, wow, do I still do that? I ask you, might you do that? Given our personal wounding and our personal circumstance, do we just completely dismiss people without the possibility of reflecting that they're still good there? I recall this quote from Brene Brown, who's such an expert in this field. And she said, what we don't need in the midst of struggle is shame for being human. And so it's understandable that we would not want someone to throw a shame blanket over us with regards to past behavior. And so why do we possibly continue to do that with others? And so finding this article once again brought up all kinds of emotion, lots of emotion, because I realized that at the time that I wrote that, I was still very much unaware of the depth of abuse that our family had gone through, my siblings, my brother. I had already reconciled that so much of his actions and his path came from the same pain that we had all experienced. But I don't know if that I had sat down with it at a deeper level and really cultivated empathy and understanding for his choices and what he had gone through based upon what I knew now had happened within our family and the level of abuse that was there. And so I don't have any kind of conclusion or advice around throwing shame blankets, other than the fact that there is something quite powerful in looking at others, re-examining the relationships of other people that we have in our lives that we may have cut out or have walked away from because of such painful circumstances. And I'm not saying that you go back if they're still alive and reintegrate, but it gives us pause to look at and to ask questions as to how did they get there? How did we get there? And what is the purpose of all of this? To just throw this blanketed definition and categorization of shame eliminates a different depth of understanding. We can understand and still not engage in the behavior, but it's the understanding piece that I'm still looking at and questioning today. How well are we able to equip ourselves to be willing to open our hearts, to keep the heart open, even in the midst of such history? My voice is getting all wigged out over this. And so I said some prayers for my brother. I offered some gratitude to him because I realized that on other dimensions, he was a gatekeeper. He was going through the same experience that I was going through, and he just processed it differently. So if that's helpful, if that is something that will give you pause this week, to just begin to look at people, to look at their actions. So much bad behavior now is just filmed and broadcast daily, like an ongoing commercial of awful, an ongoing commercial of dualism, an ongoing commercial of division and us and them. And we just become numb, and we are dehumanizing one another when we don't look at that and say there's a human being there. Even if they do something awful, there's still a human being there. And what is calling me as I witness this behavior in order to examine within my own life? Where do I just engage in a free-for-all of throwing shame blankets on everybody and then walking away in some artificial piousness that I'm better than that, because I'm not. We're all in this together. And I know that you have the skill, and I know that you have the capacity and the wisdom and the discernment to be able to examine your own choices and the stories and the relationships that ad infinitum that fill your history, and how to bring reconciliation to that. And why do it? Why re-examine all of this stuff? Because somewhere, just like me rereading that piece all these years later, I realized that there's still the inclination to engage in that. I'm still learning. I'm going to guess that you're still learning as well. And perhaps we will continue. And so what do? We remind one another. That's the best part about community, is that when community functions, whether it's live or whether it's something like this, we are reminding one another of our highest and best quality. And so I remind you today to maybe think about the act of throwing shame blankets over people. And maybe what we could do is just pause and breathe, look at the emotion, see what needs to be said, and allow ourselves to love in the same way in which we want to be loved. That's it. That's my message today. I love you.